You ever finish a story and just feel this pull, this feeling that there was so much more happening just beneath the surface? A whole world of emotion and meaning that was never actually spelled out. Well, that powerful feeling, that's usually by design. And today, we're diving into the master of that technique, Ernest Hemingway, and his game-changing idea, the iceberg theory.
Okay, so let's start with a simple idea. Look at this apple core. What does it tell you? Well, someone ate an apple. Simple enough. But think about everything it doesn't tell you. Who was it? Were they starving? Were they sitting with a friend? The core is just the tiny piece of evidence left behind from a much bigger, completely unseen story. Now, hold on to that thought, because it's pretty much the key to unlocking one of the most important writing philosophies of the last century.
All right, so here's our game plan for today. We're going to start at the top, defining the theory. Then, we're diving deep with a case study of A Farewell to Arms. After that, we'll look at how this idea pops up all over Hemingway's work, see how modern writers can use it, and finally, we'll talk about its legacy and what it really means to leave something unsaid. So, let's get right into it. What exactly is this iceberg theory? It's a concept that really shook up modern literature, and it all started back in Hemingway's early days as a journalist. The idea is actually brilliantly simple. What you read on the page, the dialogue, the action, the plot, that's just the tip of the iceberg. The tiny 1/8 you can see above the water. The real story, the true weight, the massive 7/8 is all submerged. That's where all the good stuff is. The characters' histories, their deepest fears, the emotional subtext, all the big themes. Hemingway's whole thing was that if you omit these things, if you trust the reader to feel them without being told, the story becomes way more powerful. Now, this idea didn't just appear out of thin air. It was really forged in his early career. As a journalist, he was trained to cut to the chase, report the facts, and get out. He learned to write lean. He brought that exact same minimalist style to his fiction. And then, in 1923, he had this light bulb moment. He cut the original ending of a story, where a character actually hangs himself, and he realized, whoa, the story's actually stronger without it. By 1932, he'd given the whole theory its famous name.
And here it is, the quote that sums it all up. An iceberg is majestic, it's powerful, because of the enormous, invisible mass moving it from below. Hemingway believed the same thing was true for a story. The words you see create the movement on the surface, sure, but the dignity, the weight, the sheer gravitas, that comes from everything the writer knows but chooses to leave out.
Okay, so theory is one thing, but seeing it in action is another. So let's put on our scuba gear and go below the surface of one of his most famous novels, A Farewell to Arms. This is where you can really see how a few simple words on a page can hide a whole world of meaning. First up is this line. It sounds kind of crude, right? Just a throwaway joke from a captain about the priest in their unit. On the surface, that's all it is. But with Hemingway, you always have to ask, what's really going on here?
This line is like a little Trojan horse of meaning. Sure, the surface-level joke is that the priest is wrestling with his own desires. But it's so much deeper than that. The captain is implying that in the chaos of war, everyone's beliefs are under assault, even the man of God's. It's a huge comment on a crisis of faith, all packed into just 6 blunt, telegraphic words.
Okay, let's look at another moment. This is between our main guy, Frederick, and his surgeon buddy, Rinaldi. The description is super plain, almost like a documentary. Frederick is just toweling off, and he glances over at his friend. But the words he chooses, good-looking, great friends, and just the quiet intimacy of the scene, it hints at something way more complex. This scene is an absolute masterclass in subtext. Hemingway is digging into those intense, complicated, and, kind of homoerotic bonds that get forged between men in wartime. These aren't just simple friendships. They're these profound connections born out of sheer terror and loneliness. The sources call this a sublimated passion. It's not physical, but it's incredibly intimate. And Hemingway never labels it. He just shows it to you, letting you feel those undertones for yourself.
And for our last example from this book, let's look at the main romance between Frederick and Catherine. Pretty early on, after Frederick basically admits he's been lying to her about past loves, Catherine says this, and it's a jaw-dropper. Why on earth would she want him to lie?
Because this line reveals the secret rules of their relationship. The whole thing is a shared illusion. Both of them are desperately trying to escape the horrors of the war and their own personal grief. Their love affair isn't some fairy tale. It's a game they've both agreed to play to survive. They're building a little shelter for themselves out of comforting lies, because the truth is just way too brutal to face.
And this technique, this was not a one-hit wonder. The iceberg theory is the deep current that runs through pretty much all of Hemingway's best stuff. It's the engine that makes his stories so powerful.
I mean, just look at this. The pattern is everywhere. In Hills Like White Elephants, a couple is just talking, but they're really having a soul-crushing debate about an abortion, and that word is never once said. In Big Two-Hearted River, it just looks like a guy on a fishing trip. But all that methodical focus on every little detail, that's a traumatized soldier trying to hold his mind together. The war is never mentioned, but it's haunting every single sentence. And then you have The Sun Also Rises. All the parties and travel are just a mask for the deep, deep scars left on an entire generation by World War I.
And the famous last line of that novel, it might just be the ultimate iceberg moment. Brett says they could have had such a good time together. And Jake's reply, "Isn't it pretty to think so?" Man, it's just devastating. It sounds so gentle, so wistful, but underneath it is an entire ocean of pain, loss, and the absolute certainty that their happiness was always impossible.
So, okay, Hemingway was a genius, we get it. But what does that mean for someone trying to write today? How can this be more than just a cool literary theory and actually become a practical tool that you can use?
Here are 4 key takeaways. First, be economical. Be ruthless with your words. Make every single one count. Second, live in the subtext. What are your characters not saying to each other? That's where the real drama is. Third, the old classic, show, don't tell. Instead of saying a character is sad, show them carefully, methodically, polishing a pair of shoes. And finally, you gotta trust your reader. Leave some gaps for them to fill in. That's what pulls them in and makes them a partner in telling the story.
But, and this is absolutely the most important rule of all, straight from the man himself, this is not a shortcut. It is not an excuse for being lazy. You, the writer, have to know everything about that submerged part of the iceberg. You need to know your character's full backstory, their deepest secrets, everything. If you leave something out because you just don't know it yourself, you're not creating an iceberg, you're just creating a hole. And believe me, the reader will feel it.
So, what's the final verdict on this powerful idea? Well, like any big revolutionary theory, it's got its fans, and it's definitely got its critics. So let's try to look at the whole picture. On the one hand, the strengths are huge. It forces the reader to lean in, to get involved, to co-create the story's meaning. That can be an incredibly rewarding experience. But the criticisms are fair too. For some people, it's just too vague, too ambiguous. If you omit too much, you can lose your reader, and the story can end up feeling kind of hollow, or just frustrating for people who prefer a more straightforward tale. It's a real balancing act.
And this quote, I think, just perfectly captures his ultimate goal. He wasn't trying to stuff his stories full of clever symbols that, as he put it, stick out like raisins in raisin bread. No, his goal was to write about reality with such brutal honesty, such precision, that the deeper meanings just sort of emerged on their own. He focused on making the man real, the sea real, and because he did that so well, the story ended up meaning a million different things to a million different people. That was the magic.
Which brings us to our final thought for the day. We live in an age of information overload, right? We have endless feeds and notifications and hot takes telling us exactly what to think about everything. So I'll just leave you with this to chew on. In a world that will not shut up, what is the real power? What is the profound value of leaving something unsaid?